From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to the show. So Rahm Emanuel has a big meeting scheduled for February 24th. That's when he sits down with us for his job performance review, and we decide whether we want to honor his request for a new 4-year contract. So we, as his employers, are going to want to take a look at his skill set. What are his core strengths? Where is he lacking in his performance? We might want to tell him to work on his education and violence suppression policy development skills a little bit. We'd probably have to give him high marks, though, for his shaking money out of the trees in Washington for transportation projects skills. In his first term, Emanuel has found money to completely reconstruct the south branch of the Red Line, begin planning for an expansion of it all the way to 130th, get pilot money for total reconstruction of practically everything between Belmont and Linden, replace a couple of stations on the Blue Line, rebuild the Brown and Red interconnect, all that stuff, buy hundreds of new cars and buses. When you throw in the bike lanes and his efforts to build bus rapid transit, this guy is the closest thing we've had to a transportation mayor in generations. At least that's the way it seems to me. So this would be a pretty good time to be a transportation reporter for a big metropolitan daily. And we have him right here. Jon Hilkevitch is joining us today. Jon, really glad to have you here once again for one of our state of transportation addresses that we do from time to time. Is that an exaggeration? Has Rahm Emanuel sort of distinguished himself in his ability to shake money out for transportation projects?
He has, but he's been fortunate too, Ken. He has the obvious connections to the Obama administration, particularly his very close friend, Ray LaHood, who until recently was U.S. Transportation Secretary. Rahm and LaHood talk on the phone almost every day still, even though LaHood's out of office. They email each other. And LaHood has sent a lot of money from Washington to Chicago.
But he's not there anymore.
He's not there anymore, but almost equally important, Mayor Emanuel has benefited greatly from Governor Quinn's Illinois Jobs Now capital improvement program. That was a $31 billion program over 6 years. Not all transportation, but a lot of it did go to roads and bridges and mass transit. That program has expired. The governor did this summer sign a temporary bill, a new bill, about $1 billion, but that's just going to be for fixing roads and bridges and not directed at mass transit. So the state does need a long-term capital bill, but we're obviously not going to see that until after the election.
Well, I mean, I say this almost kind of half jokingly because, as we mentioned, Rahm Emanuel wants to, and it needs to be done, replace pretty much everything from Belmont North, all the viaducts, all the track, all the electrical, everything. Right. And that's what, a couple of billion?
More than a couple. It's almost $5 billion, $4.7 billion from, as you say, south of Belmont through the north side, Evanston and Wilmette. It needs it. I mean, it's 100 years old. The stations, as most people know, have been falling apart. The CTA has been spending some money, upwards of about $80 million over the last few years, just putting Band-Aids on some of these horrible stations like Jarvis and other stations. But they need to do the long-term fix for Track 2. And they need to build capacity for the long term because rail ridership, unlike bus ridership, rail ridership is going up.
So, I mean, that just not to let go of this for a moment. It's like so far he's found like $30 million for some planning, right? That's about it.
Yeah, he's got $35 million from the feds for that $4.7 billion project. So it's for planning, it's for engineering. But the city was somewhat, very smart and able to work with Senator Dick Durbin to define that pot of money. That pot of money previously was reserved for what are called New Start projects. So that's like building new light rail lines in the Sun Belt and things like that. And Durbin was able to create this core capacity program to help old urban areas, and this money was dedicated to the red and purple modernization. It's the only project so far that has received money out of that pot.
Yeah, okay, good. Because I mean that is such an important thing. It's sort of like this with every funding thing. There's always money to build the bright, shiny new your little train set project or whatever else it is. It's not only just transportation, but the money is never there to go back down into the subways and rebuild them and just keep the things running, and even more importantly still, to expand the capacity of them, because that's really expensive.
And that's our need. I mean, we got to fix what we have.
Yeah.
It's 100 years old. I mean, we don't have the luxury of some places in Asia and especially the Middle East where they're building this infrastructure for the first time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
of course it's very impressive.
Right.
But here you're right, that money has not been existing, and it doesn't look real good for the near term. The federal transportation bill expires at the end of September, and it's very unlikely it'll be reauthorized as a multi-year bill. It'll probably be some Band-Aids to just keep the money flowing as is for a while.
Yeah, and I mean, as a CTA writer, lifelong CTA writer, it just amazes me sometimes when you go down into, like, the Washington stations of the Blue and the Red Line, and Monroe, these old stations that were built in the 40s, 50s, have never had anything but a coat of paint, many hundreds of coats of paints on them. But you go to London, you go to other places, you go to DC, and you see these beautiful, sparkling things, and you think, how is it they can do it and we can't do it?
Well, we just haven't raised the revenue. We haven't raised taxes. That's the evil word. But the CTA is slowly picking away at it. Grandin State was done. Chicago
Beautiful
State.
job, yeah.
Clark and Division is underway now.
Right.
So they are getting at it, but there's CTA alone has over $10 billion in unmet capital needs.
Yeah, yeah.
So
it was interesting. I think you wrote something the other day about the Harrison Station on the Red Line that they kind of, I don't know, that's somewhere between Band-Aid and rehab, right? I mean, it's sort of a mid-level thing, but it looks really nice. They redid everything with LED lighting and really brightened the place up. Some new tile and new flooring and it looks like a new station, even though it isn't, and it probably still needs millions of infrastructure work. But it's a nice sort of remodeling job.
I agree, and frankly, those are the kind of projects I'd like to see more of.
Yeah.
Instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars on new terminals, people don't live in the terminals.
Right,
They go in,
right.
they get on a train, they get off.
You're referring to 95th Street? I think?
95th Street.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
95th needs expansion,
Yeah,
but in general, the CTA, I think, is spending way too much money on some of these terminal modernizations, and I think they could be a lot more frugal and stretch their dollar.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is something that's just kind of, I don't know, just something psychological about walking down into that Harrison Station, which was the worst of the worst.
Right.
And now all of a sudden it looks pretty nice, and for, I would imagine, a moderate expenditure anyway.
Right.
So you were a big, you got really involved in the whole thing about the 5000 series L cars with the
Center-facing
aisles,
seats.
the facing seats.
Exactly.
Looks like that battle got lost, but maybe in the short term, but not the long term.
Yeah, the CTA is looking at a new procurement for what they're calling the 7000 series, and those definitely will not be dominated by those bowling alley type seats. Riders just didn't like them. The people standing would be stepping on your toes. Their midsections would be right in your face if you were sitting.
The issue of the personal space and where you're looking is a kind of a weird thing.
Yeah. So the 7000 series, they did get feedback from the public. They did re-engineer it, and it'll be 800 plus new cars with a combination. There will be some center-facing seats. Well, hopefully there'll be buckets that define the space for each passenger rather than these benches.
Yeah, yeah. So that was just a misstep. I mean, that was a fairly large misstep in miscalculating what the public was willing to tolerate, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this was made by during a previous administration about 3 or 4 CTA presidents ago.
Yeah.
And they thought Chicagoans would go for basically a New York style subway train, and we don't.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting. I mean, I have to say again, just like there's something very cool about standing like at the Jackson station, which has been redone, or like you say, Grandin State, at this really gleaming new station and watching this, new LED train pulling in, and you're standing there thinking, wow, if this was like 1961, you would say that, this is like that Jetson future or something. So, yes, there are improvements being made, but we obviously want to see more. So I have to ask you, one of the things they wanted to do to speed the system up was to build this flyover where the brown line and the red line split somewhere up around Clark and Belmont up there. And,
Right.
And it would have involved building this kind of overpass thing. And
Yeah, they
boy,
call
that
it-
went over badly.
Well, it's still in play, although the CTA and the mayor are not talking about it right now. But basically, it was north of Belmont at a place called Clark Junction, very busy junction where the red line, the purple line, and the brown line converge. And it's a bad intersection now. CTA wants to spend a lot of money building this flyover. It's in the Lakeview community, which is really regentrified. A lot of new residential construction there. Some fairly new buildings would have to be knocked down to make way for this flyover. The buildings that would remain, these tracks would be right at window level for some of these folks. So there's a lot of pushback. CTA tried this project many years ago. It flew in the face of public opposition. It
I didn't know that.
It died then. So, it's on the back burner now. I personally don't think it's worth the expense. They're talking about either a number of seconds to maybe just a couple of minutes savings in delay. And I think CTA has bigger fights to fight.
I mean, I guess just if you sort of visualize this kind of like a Y junction, right? So if you're looking, in our case, you're looking north, so the red line goes straight and the brown line veers off.
Right.
And if there's a red line coming south and you're waiting to go, and you're a brown line train, you got to wait for that train to come through. So what they want to do is they want to put a bridge over there so you don't have to wait.
Exactly. So it would be grade separated for the trains.
Yeah,
And right now at Clark Junction, there's a tower person there who's basically a traffic cop directing trains.
Yeah. So I mentioned in the open that it's not just trains and buses. It's not just the CTA, but this push, which is a kind of a global push, I guess, for BRT, for bus rapid transit. A lot of cities have been very successful with it, but we've not really dipped our toe into BRT very much in Chicago, and so there's this huge proposal to kind of redo Ashland, and boy,
Right.
it's not going over well either.
No, there is a lot of public opposition to it. The city is going for what's considered the gold standard of bus rapid transit on Ashland. It's a $160 million project. You would have bus stations in the median of Ashland. You'd take away one traffic lane in each direction. And the idea is that you'd have these buses operating almost like rapid transit. It's a great expense. It almost eliminates all left turns for vehicles. It reduces traffic capacity by 50%. The city's argument is that this is such an attractive mode of transit that people would get out of their cars and onto these BRT buses. I'm not so sure that's the case. In other cities we've seen cars where there are BRT lines just skating through residential streets to try to avoid the reduced lanes, and it's causing traffic issues, safety issues there. So it's still, the city doesn't have any money, first of all, for this $160 million project. So it's on a slow track. It's not dead. I expect to see some modifications to it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the city goes ahead both on Ashland and possibly Western. They did a project a few years ago on Jeffrey Boulevard, which was BRT light, because it doesn't have
The jump.
it doesn't have most of the features of what true BRT is. City finally, just earlier this year, put in what's called traffic signal priority, so that those buses will get extended greens or early greens at intersections, so as you say, they could jump around other traffic.
Again, it's one of those just horrendous problems with living in a fully built out city that just doesn't have there's no open space that you can do these things in.
Right.
You can't build these projects without unbuilding something else. And
And our major arterials are already clogged.
Yeah.
I mean, Ashland is a wide street.
Yeah.
Personally, I'd like to get rid of some of those center planters that you have all over Ashland, and either give it to the buses, the bicyclists, or the cars.
there's another one that you get a lot of pushback on that. A lot of people really like those. And it's a little too expensive to just tunnel under it and build a subway all the way out there. We couldn't do that, huh?
Well, it's all about money.
Yeah. And what is subway now? About $1 billion a mile or something? Probably.
Yeah, and that's why BRT is seen as a cost-effective alternative.
There was a study done just recently, which you reported on extensively from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, talking about the concept of transit deserts in
Right.
Chicago, which I think is really interesting because we think of ourselves as being a fairly transit-rich place. We've got all the Metro, we got CTA going pretty much everywhere, but as the thing points out, and the study points out, and you yourself have pointed out over the years, there are these huge places in Chicago where you just can't get there unless you've got a car.
That's right. I mean, we have a hub and spoke system, and we've
Yeah.
had that for 60 or 80 years, where everything is downtown centric, and the spokes feed out into the neighborhoods and into the suburbs. But if you live between those spokes, especially in these areas called transit deserts, which means that you're at least a half mile from a rail line, you're at least a quarter mile from any decent kind of bus connection, I mean, you're sort of really out there. And it tends to be in poor, low-income communities, and there just isn't a connection for those folks to get to jobs.
And perhaps the biggest part of this, we're sort of burying the lead here, is that over the years, all the jobs have gone out into those places.
Right.
And it's
They've left in, right. And so the 4 out of the 5 major suburban job corridors, just clusters of thousands and thousands of jobs, there's no transit out there either. So you have people that are doing 2-3 hour one-way trips just to get to low-paying jobs, using transit, or they're buying cars that they can't afford and spending an inordinate amount of their income on gas and parking.
So is transit actually the solution for this? I mean, at what point in an urban area the size of Chicago, at what point on the grid do you begin to stop building transit? I mean, isn't there some logic to it that there's a point beyond which you say, okay, you folks out there, you're on your own. Your cars or nothing, and we're going to have all the transit down here in this part, which is going to be a much higher quality of life, but that's your problem.
Maybe so, but I don't think we're there yet. The Center for Neighborhood Technology and the Active Transportation Alliance, as part of this study on transit deserts, are also proposing up to $20 billion worth of transit investment over the long term. And these are projects that the CTA has looked at over the years, connecting the Brown Line to the Blue Line for people going out to O'Hare, extending the Forest Park branch of the Blue Line out to Oak Brook and DuPage County, and the O'Hare branch out to Schaumburg, Yellow Line to Old Orchard, Orange Line to Ford City. I mean, these are projects that make a lot of sense, that would serve a lot of people for a lot of good reasons, but they've never gotten off the burner. So this Transit Future project is trying to get a grassroots effort moving to convince lawmakers in Springfield that, hey, people might be willing to pay a little more if the money is invested wisely and we get good returns.
Well, that kind of brings us back again to the NIMBYism and then, not in my backyard, because I remember when the CTA seriously talked recently about extending the Yellow Line to Skokie. They had the right of way. They could have pretty well done it. They could have sent it all the way out to Old Orchard. But the community said no, they didn't want it.
There were some people in the community that said no, but George Van Duzen, the Skokie mayor, is still very much behind it. I think members of the business community are. And there are always the NIMBYs, but I think their voices are loud, but their numbers are not that great.
Now, of course, the one that everybody's had their eyes on for a long time is this red line to 130th Street.
Right.
And Rahm Emanuel came into office pledging that as mayor he would make that happen. And there is, at least for the first time ever in history, there is at least movement on it. There are routes, right?
Well, yeah, the CTA has narrowed it down to one route on either the east or west side of the Union Pacific Railroad track right away. So they have that route, but they are still in the planning stage. And this is a project that Southsiders have been clamoring about for decades. So they're seeing the red and purple line modernization moving forward on the north side, and all they're hearing about is more environmental studies for the red line extension. So,
well, I mean, if we're going to play north side, south side, let's be fair about this. The biggest transit repair project, I think, in the last 50 years happened on the south side.
It did. Last year, the modernization of the Dan Ryan branch. So there is that. But, while the mayor, as you say, may be the transportation mayor of recent times, I think, perhaps in the black community, his weakness may be delivering on that red line extension.
That's right.
He said during the campaign that he would have it started within a couple of years of his election.
Right.
That wasn't a realistic promise, and he certainly hasn't been able to keep it.
Yeah, and I assume it would look a little bit like most of the Orange Line, right? It would be kind of up on, and it would be on railroad tracks, and
Right.
stations would be part of that. And there's going to be 3 stations, I believe? Or is it
4 new stations.
4 stations, all the way down to 130th Street. So, and I just also, we're already running out of time, but on the NIMBY thing, I live out northwest and was fascinated to see the community revolt that happened when the city announced the next phase of the Milwaukee Avenue reconstruction.
Right.
And like all the rest of Milwaukee Avenue, it was going to have bike lanes and reduce the traffic and car traffic. And they just said, hell no, we're not doing this. We don't want these bicycle things up here in our neighborhood. And they won that fight, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, CDOT still has to make a final decision. There'll be another hearing later this summer, and the work will be done next year in conjunction with a repaving. There already are bike lanes on Milwaukee. It's the busiest biking corridor in the city. But what the city is talking about in the most drastic measure is to remove 1 lane in each direction on Milwaukee and put in either buffered or protected bike lanes. So that would not only reduce traffic flow, but it would also reduce parking as well. And a lot of the residents, commuters, merchants don't want it. They say, you know, bikers share the road now. It seems to work. City says, well, not quite true. You know, we have almost an accident a day on Milwaukee. Over 1,000 injuries over the last 5 years, including 1 fatality. So they see it as a safety issue.
And while we're out northwest, in our last couple of minutes here, Rahm Emanuel can do a lot of things, and he's got a lot of friends in the federal government, but he cannot make O'Hare quieter, can he?
No, in fact, that's not his intention. His intention is to build up flights. I mean, right now, O'Hare is only doing about 2,400 flights a day. That's very low by recent standards. Back in 2004, it was closer to 3,000 flights a day.
It's that much of a difference.
So it really is down. So even though people are now, it's summer, they're opening their windows, this new configuration of air traffic patterns due to the new runways is putting noise east and west of the airport at levels that didn't exist before. But you know, we are at low traffic. And if the economy continues to improve and flights increase, we ain't seen nothing yet. And the mayor, you know, he's inherited this $10 billion plus O'Hare modernization program. The whole idea is to increase flights. And jets are noisy.
That was the whole point of it, right? To make O'Hare, to have it to be able to continue to be competitive.
But he's really failed, in the view of a lot of people, to show a sympathetic ear to people that are suffering this noise.
Well, we talked about skill sets earlier. One of his lacking skill sets is showing empathy. He doesn't seem to be able to do that very well. And then there's Midway too. The same. All of a sudden now people on the South Side are complaining. We were down visiting some friends in Hyde Park the other night, and they were going on and on and on about airport noise. And I said, you should come up by us. You want to hear airport noise? I'll show you airport noise.
Well, the traffic patterns are related at O'Hare and Midway. So when it changed at O'Hare, there were changes.
Oh, is that what caused it?
Yeah, there were changes that took effect at
So they can
Midway
blame
also.
O'Hare for that then?
They could blame O'Hare, but it's still noisy, right?
So, in conclusion, and this is really kind of what I really wanted to get from you today, are we doing better on transportation issues now than we were in the past? I mean, are we more aware of them and dealing with them more, or is it about the same?
I think it's about the same. Certainly this mayor is all about sound bites and publicity. And
he's all about letting you think that he's all about transportation.
And, you know,
right?
some of these projects we discussed today are Emanuel's. They are new. Others are things that he inherited that were in the pipeline for many years. So certainly there's a more public attention to it. But we're still, you know, one of the most congested regions of the country. We still have people in transit deserts that can't get around, and we don't see any near-term solutions. We still are in a pollution, you know, alert, you know, almost every day. You know, we need to do a lot more.
But our intersections are a lot safer now with all those cameras.
Yeah, well, at least the revenue's up. But you know, the message is that we can't rely on Washington, and whether it's doing smarter public-private partnerships or increasing local revenue, you know, we really have to do it on our own. Other states, California, Virginia, whether it's tolling, whether it's raising gas taxes, they're doing it. And
it's interesting to see what LA did with their mass I mean, they're just jumping to the front in mass transportation, coming out of nowhere, and they're doing it themselves.
They approved a referendum for $40 billion in transit improvements.
Yeah, because when you don't have it, you actually understand the value of it, I guess. All right. Well, John, thank you very much for coming by for the annual check-in to tell us how we're doing.
Always enjoy it.
All right. Jon Hilkevitch, of course, is transportation reporter for the Chicago Tribune. You can see him there and online, and you can watch us anytime you want here on CAN TV, or you can see us right here at this address anytime you want, and you can get us on iTunes too, and we hope you will. And we will be back next week with another program. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.